Kofi bought a honey cake for a girl he owed a debt to, and the sweetness almost broke him. The market was Ironhaven's Tuesday market, the weekly eruption of commerce that filled the central square with vendors and livestock and the concentrated smell of everything edible the North produced. Roasted groundnuts in pyramids on wooden trays. Smoked fish in baskets lined with banana leaves, the flesh dark and salt-crusted. Pyramids of yams. Buckets of shea nuts. Bolts of cloth, some enchanted, humming faintly with encoding frequency. The weaver's work moving from loom to market to body in the ancient circuit of northern commerce. Kofi walked through it with a cane and a stipend. The stipend was modest, the custodian's compensation, drawn from the network's shared resources, enough to cover food and housing and the basic necessities of a man who had lived on nothing for 14 months and did not require much. But it was money. Earned money. His. The first regular income he had possessed since the scavenging economy of the depths had collapsed with his emergence. He bought groundnuts first. Roasted, still warm, the shells splitting under his thumbnail with a satisfying crack, the nuts inside oily and hot, the taste of salt and char, and the specific nuttiness that the northern savanna's soil produced, drier, more intense than the forest zone's groundnuts, carrying the terroir of harmattan and laterite and the deep mineral content of earth that the root lines had enriched for 1,000 years. He bought smoked fish, a whole tilapia, its flesh dense and salty, wrapped in paper that immediately darkened with oil. He bought a portion of tizi, the thick millet flour staple, with groundnut soup ladled into a carved gourd. The soup was rich and heavy, the groundnuts pounded smooth, the dried fish dissolved into the broth adding a deep umami undertone. He ate standing at the vendor's stall, the tizi torn in pieces and scooped through the soup with his right hand, the way he had eaten before the depths, before the protocol, before the reformed mind had made him something more than a man eating in a market. The market woman recognized him. The vendor at the northeast corner, Mom Abina, not the guild's master weaver, but a different Abina, a stocky woman with a scar across her left eyebrow from a childhood accident and hands that moved with the competent speed of someone who had been measuring grain since she could stand. She had given him a handful of groundnuts once, months ago, when he had emerged from the depths gaunt and disoriented, and carrying nothing but the clothes on his back and a mind that had been broken and rebuilt. "You." She pointed at him with a measuring cup. "The thin one from the caves."
"The thin one from the caves."
Kofi confirmed. "You are less thin."
"I am eating."
"You are eating at my stall." She grinned. "Good, you needed feeding. I told her that boy will die in those caves, and now look, walking with a stick but walking." The daughter, the little girl who had given him groundnuts from her own handful when he had sat in the market square with nothing, not money, not food, not the strength to scavenge, just the hollow exhaustion of a man who had completed the protocol's breaking and had not yet understood what the rebuilding was for. She had been 5 or 6. She had walked up to him, looked at him with the uncomplicated assessment of a child, and put groundnuts in his hand. No words, just the nuts, warm from her palm, and the grave, direct look of a person who saw someone who was hungry and did the obvious thing. The girl appeared from behind the stall. Older now, 7, maybe 8, the growth of a year visible in longer limbs and a face that was losing its infant roundness. She looked at Kofi, recognized him with the immediate, unclouded recognition of a child. "You are the groundnut man," she said.
"I am the groundnut man."
"Are you still hungry?"
"No."
Kofi crouched carefully, the cane taking his weight, the knee grinding through the motion with the familiar complaint. He was at her eye level. The market's noise surrounded them, vendors calling, customers bargaining, the clatter of measuring cups, and the thud of yams being stacked. The smell of charcoal smoke and roasting meat, and the dry, dusty sweetness of the harmattan's last days.
"I came to buy you something."
He bought a honey cake from the stall 2 vendors down, a golden disc of millet flour and shea butter, drenched in honey that the northern beekeepers harvested from the savanna's wild hives. The honey was dark, almost amber, carrying the flavor of the wildflowers and acacia blossoms the bees had foraged. The cake was warm. He placed it in her hands. She bit into it. Honey ran down her chin. She smiled, the absolute, unqualified smile of a child eating something sweet. The sweetness hit Kofi in the chest. Not the honey's sweetness, the moment's. A year ago he had been the man in the market with nothing. The marginal candidate. The scavenger who had touched a wall in the dark because curiosity was the only thing left. Now he was standing in the sunlight with a cane and a stipend and the ability to buy a honey cake for a girl who had fed him when feeding him was the bravest thing anyone had done. His eyes burned. He blinked. Breathed. The reformed mind processed the emotional data with its usual clinical precision and filed it under, cost justified. The ruined knee, the 14 months in the dark, the breaking, the rebuilding, the convergence, the pain, all of it reduced to a single justification, standing in a market eating a honey cake with honey on her chin. He stood. The knee protested. The cane clicked against packed earth. He walked through the market with the reformed mind humming and the scavenger's heart full, and the ordinary, extraordinary weight of being alive and fed and useful pressing against the inside of his chest like a hand. The custodian's Tuesday. After the market, the coordination meeting. The 4-fragment diagnostic sweep, routine now, 8 weeks into the network's operation. Each custodian running their maintenance protocol, each report transmitted through the network, each anomaly logged, each system parameter assessed. The diagnostics were clean. The root lines carried stable frequency. The shadow binding reported healthy boundaries. The encoding sang through cloth. The enskinment held. Routine. The beautiful, unglamorous routine of maintenance. The thing that mattered most because it happened every week and nothing dramatic accompanied it, and the system's survival depended on it continuing whether or not anyone noticed. Kofi ran the integration analysis, the conductor's function, perceiving all 4 fragments simultaneously, checking coherence, identifying drift. No drift, no corruption. The network was holding. The system was stable. He filed the report, transmitted it, received the auditor's confirmation, Tohage's diagnostic overlay, checking the custodian's reports for consistency, verifying that the monitors were not being monitored by their own blind spots. The architecture of accountability. Imperfect, contested, necessary. Then the protocol spoke. Not through the custodian network. Not through the standard frequency channels. Through the geological substrate, the bedrock voice, the deep register that carried communication through stone and soil, and the compressed millennia of Earth beneath Ironhaven streets. Anomaly detected. Protocol interface activation. Location, unmapped. The activation predates this protocol's operational records. Kofi stopped walking. He was in the street between the market and his quarters, a narrow lane lined with mud brick compounds, the afternoon sun hot on his shoulders, the smell of cooking fires drifting from the compound's inner courtyards. A woman was pounding fufu 3 doors down, the rhythmic thud of pestle in mortar providing the heartbeat of the street.
Specify.
He said, to the ground, to the bedrock, to the thing that was speaking from beneath everything. The protocol detects an unregistered candidate at a pre-Zagale interface. The interface is not in the protocol's architecture. The interface predates the protocol's design specifications. Pre-Zagale? The words carried the weight of a category the reformed mind had not been trained to process. The protocol had pre-Zagale components. The training system, the immune response that found marginal candidates and broke them and rebuilt them into custodians, was not entirely the Zagale's creation. The Zagale had built on something that was already in the substrate, something that could detect consciousness, assess potential, identify the marginal. Something that was activating now. The other custodians' data arrived through the network simultaneously. Azindo, anomalous warmth at the boundary's deepest interface, the shadow binding encountering geological frequency registers it had no framework for. WuDon, a second fruit on the grandfather tree, blue instead of amber, pulsing with a non-Zagale frequency. Zuera, the tapestry's fluid script expanding, writing in a language older than the encoding network, a greeting delivered in living characters that cycled and shifted and would not hold still. 4 anomalies, 1 phenomenon, the foundation was active. Kofi stood in the street and processed the combined data with the conductor's integrating function. The individual anomalies, perceived through separate frameworks, resolved into a single pattern. Something beneath the Zagale's system was reaching upward, through every channel, through every fragment, through the boundary, the root lines, the encoding, the protocol itself, using the system's infrastructure the way a voice uses air as medium, not source. The source was deeper, older, in the geological substrate, where something patient and vast had been waiting since before the Zagale arrived and built their system on top of it without fully understanding what they were building on. Not attack, not corruption, introduction. The protocol's assessment arrived through the bedrock voice. Not the dome's clinical evaluation, something warmer, deeper, carrying the resonance of the foundation itself. Candidate status, unknown. Interface predates this protocol's design specifications. The training system was encountering the limits of its own architecture. The protocol had been built to assess candidates within the Zagale's framework. This was outside the framework. Below it, the foundation on which the framework stood. Kofi stared east, toward the Ashvale depths. The dome's inscriptions had flickered with pre-Zagale patterns during his visit. The substrate warmth, the older markings beneath the protocol's carvings. The Zagale had built their system on an older substrate the way every civilization builds on the ruins of what came before, using the foundation without fully understanding its nature. The ruins were stirring. He transmitted his data to the network. The protocol's bedrock voice, the unregistered candidate, the pre-Zagale interface. 4 custodians processing the same phenomenon through 4 different frameworks, arriving at the same conclusion. Something was waking beneath the system they maintained, and the system's architects had not anticipated it because the architects had not known it was there. The protocol offered one final assessment, not of the unregistered candidate, not of the anomaly, of the situation itself, the totality of what was emerging, the full scope of the foundation's activation, the implications for a system that had been restored and connected, and was now discovering that its own foundations were deeper than its builders knew. Assessment, promising. Promising, the word the protocol had used for Kofi after his reformation, the assessment of untested potential, of trajectories that exceeded the minimum, of futures the system could not yet predict but found worth pursuing. But this time the protocol was not assessing a candidate, it was assessing the future. Something was waking beneath the foundation, and the protocol, ancient, patient, built for those the system rejected, found it promising. Not threatening, not alarming, promising, the way a teacher finds a new student promising. The way a system designed to find value in the marginal finds value in the unknown. The word settled in Kofi's chest. He stood in the street with the afternoon sun on his shoulders, and the taste of honey cake still faint on his tongue, and the steady, grinding ache of his ruined knee reminding him that power costs flesh and the flesh remembers, and the remembering is the price, and the price is honest. Promising, the page was turning. The first movement, the cage, the convergence, the restoration, was complete. The second movement was beginning, and the conductor was already hearing the opening notes, strange and old and rising from beneath everything he thought he knew. He turned east, the Ashvale depths waited, the pre-Zagale interface waited, the foundation waited. The reformed mind calculated, the scavenger improvised, the custodian committed. Kofi walked, his knee ground, his cane clicked against packed earth. The system hummed beneath his feet. And beneath the system, in the deep geological substrate where something old and patient and vast had been waiting since before time was measured and before the word
custodian
had meaning in any language, that something waited with the specific, immense patience of a presence that had been here longer than anyone knew and was, at last, being heard. The music was changing. New instruments were joining. The conductor limped toward the opening notes of something he had no score for and no training to play. He would improvise, the way the scavenger always had, the way the marginal always must. Promising. The pattern continued.